What if I told you that behind Ferrari's closed doors, Lewis Hamilton has just dropped 2 documents so explosive they could reshape the team's future forever? Not just setup notes, not just feedback, but a manifesto. Part critique, part ultimatum. Forget summer holidays, forget the idea of a smooth integration. While most drivers were recharging, Hamilton was plotting, writing, and confronting. And what he handed over to Ferrari's bosses wasn't only about next year's car, it was about identity, leadership, and control. Now the question is, will Ferrari embrace his vision, or will the resistance inside Maranello tear the team apart from within? That off-camera line from Lewis Hamilton, delivered directly to Ferrari's leadership, wasn't simply a request about car setup. It was a statement of intent. While everyone assumed Hamilton would rest during the summer break, he took the opposite path. He immersed himself inside the factory, summoning meetings with Elkann, Vigna, Vasseur, and Loa. His focus stretched beyond 2025. This was about 2026, about Ferrari's very DNA, and about the question of who truly holds power. So what exactly did those documents contain? Why did Nico Rosberg, Hamilton's old rival turned Sky analyst, declare without hesitation, "If I were Ferrari, I'd pay attention to every single word Lewis has written"? According to insiders, the reports weren't mere technical feedback. They tore into Ferrari's structure, exposed flaws in the development model, criticized the suspension team's risk-averse philosophy, and called out the internal resistance Hamilton has felt since the Chinese Grand Prix. But not everyone inside Ferrari welcomed this level of honesty. The fallout triggered a fresh battle line in the quiet civil war already dividing the team. When Hamilton signed with Ferrari, many dismissed it as a farewell lap, a glamorous retirement project. Yet these documents showed the opposite. Lewis wasn't there just to drive. He was there to transform. One of the most striking passages in his second report read, "You recruited me as a 7-time world champion, yet you expect me to drive as if I've never won a title." His criticism wasn't aimed at the mechanics or the trackside engineers, but at the entrenched culture resisting him. He called it a climate of fear, an unwillingness to gamble even when the data clearly supported bold choices. This is what fractured the leadership. Vasseur, already under pressure, struggled to maintain balance. Loa, meanwhile, stood openly with Hamilton, only to be accused by the technical committee of being too Mercedes. In truth, Hamilton has stopped acting like a mere employee. He's behaving like someone trying to rebuild Ferrari's culture from the inside. His mission at Maranello isn't just about victories, it's to show that without change, even a driver of his caliber cannot win in red. The documents he submitted weren't just feedback, they were a challenge. Stacked with simulations, data models, and side-by-side Mercedes comparisons, they landed directly on the desks of Ferrari's top management. One highlighted line stood out: "Changing culture is harder than swapping a front wing." The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some engineers were impressed by the depth of analysis, while others bristled at the sharp tone. Sources claim that when Leclerc learned Hamilton was pressing for an overhaul of the 2025 suspension approach, his response was cutting. Ferrari doesn't need a re-education. But Hamilton refused to back down. In a private session with Loa, he even brought up Mercedes telemetry traces to demonstrate how Ferrari's SF25 broke his braking rhythm. His words were simple: "This isn't about personal preference, it's about logic." His race engineer, Adami, tried to mediate, off the record admitting that resistance runs deep within the culture, but adding that Hamilton is right to keep pushing. At this stage, the problem isn't only technical, it's political. A staring contest: will Hamilton bend or will Ferrari system? And resistance wasn't limited to the technical side, it spread to Charles Leclerc's camp. With 5 podiums already compared to Hamilton's 0, Leclerc grew uneasy with the influence his new teammate was building. His inner circle began quietly questioning whether Ferrari was shifting its identity to serve a single driver. "Are we changing Ferrari for one man, or are we changing it to win?" asked one engineer close to Leclerc. The track offered a partial answer. At Spa, Hamilton, starting outside the top 10, managed to equal Leclerc's pace in the second stint, running a setup he had crafted himself outside Ferrari's standard parameters. After the race, Hamilton was clear in the debrief: "The car is still wrong, but now I understand why." Adami listened silently. Leclerc, however, left the room before the meeting had finished, a move widely read as discomfort with the shifting power balance. Now, the clash of driving styles has evolved into a clash of authority. Ferrari stands once again at the heart of a crisis, a battle not just for speed, but for the soul of the Scuderia. Behind the factory gates, the real discussion isn't about suspension settings or aero tweaks anymore, it's about loyalty. Hamilton's written reports read less like technical debriefs and more like political manifestos. His vision outlined sweeping changes, overhauling the simulation unit, rewriting how engineers and drivers communicate, and even stripping long-standing figures in the technical office of their veto power. And his most controversial demand? Ending Ferrari's philosophy of driver neutrality. That policy, designed to build a car that suits both drivers equally, has been a cornerstone of Ferrari's self-image. But Hamilton challenged it head-on, allegedly telling the team, "A car for everyone is a car for no one." According to him, compromise has been costing performance, and the evidence lies in the numbers. His telemetry, especially in heavy braking zones and fast corners, shows tiny flaws that aren't visible through style, but translate into lost tenths every lap. The cracks are no longer theoretical, they're visible, and as Monza approaches, insiders claim Ferrari is reaching a breaking point. The choice is simple: evolve with Hamilton's radical approach or risk losing the one driver bold enough to question the system itself. And already the balance inside Maranello is shifting. Over the last 2 weeks, engineers who once resisted his input have begun attending Hamilton-led simulation sessions. Test parameters borrowed from his Mercedes days are being added to Ferrari's future programs. Even Adami, his race engineer, once accused of softening Hamilton's blunt critiques, has stopped filtering the feedback. One insider put it plainly, Adami's fully on his side now. Yet resistance remains. A senior figure within Ferrari's chassis division pushed back against Hamilton's suspension redesign, warning that altering too much would erode Ferrari's DNA. Hamilton's camp fired back with its own mantra: performance is the new DNA, and the tide continues to turn. In a recent behind-closed-doors strategy session, Hamilton was granted full access to the 2026 development calendar, information usually reserved for the most senior technical directors. For some, this is a sign of growing trust. For others, it's a warning. If Hamilton is already influencing the foundations of the next car, Ferrari's destiny is no longer being written by committee, but by the conviction of a single disruptor. On the outside, though, everything looks polished. Smiling faces on the grid, carefully crafted social posts, official statements about team unity. But behind the curtain, the tension is real. Sources describe Ferrari on edge. Because Monza this year is more than a race, it's a referendum. Does Ferrari cling to tradition, protecting its hierarchy, or does it break the mold and embrace Hamilton's forward-thinking vision, even at the cost of sidelining loyal insiders? Inside meetings, Leclerc has grown noticeably colder, sticking strictly to technical matters. Hamilton, meanwhile, has expanded his reach beyond the garage, holding direct talks with Elkann about timelines and pushing for faster adoption of driver-driven processes. This isn't a driver feud. It's an ideological collision. Ferrari represents loyalty, heritage, and emotion. Hamilton represents data, precision, and relentless progress. And in the middle stands Fred Vasseur, fighting to keep the team from tearing itself apart. The next step is Monza. Every radio exchange, every strategy call, every setup tweak will be scrutinized not just as race tactics, but as signals of allegiance. If Hamilton receives the upgrades he's demanded, it means Ferrari is leaning into transformation. If those developments stall, or if Leclerc's side of the garage is clearly prioritized, the message will be just as clear: the old Ferrari still rules. Hamilton didn't come to Maranello to fade into the red background. He came to expose weaknesses, to force reform, and, if necessary, to tear down what doesn't work. The documents were only the opening act. They pushed Ferrari into a conversation it has avoided for years. Are we building for legacy, or are we building for victory? Rosberg put it best: ignore the words of a 7-time champion at your own risk. Because silence doesn't just cost races, it costs relevance. And this year, Monza won't just be the temple of speed, it will be the arena where Ferrari decides between tradition and transformation. And the entire world will be watching.